Welcome all to the AI and Authentic Assessment webinar. We'll start with our karakia. Mauri ora kia mātou, arahina mātou ia mātou mahi, ke mihia he huarahi mō te kaupapa o te mātauranga hangarau, āwhina atu, āwhina mai. Te pau e here nei ia mātou, hui e, tae ki e.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. David Parsons. David is the Research Director at Academy X and a professor at the University of Canterbury. With over 30 years of experience as a teacher, academic, practitioner, and researcher, he brings a wealth of knowledge to this session. He is the founding editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Mobile and Blended Learning, a certified member of the Association for Learning Technologies, and a leading voice in the conversation around AI in education. David is also one of the authors of the Scaffolded AI Literacy SAIL framework, which explores how we can better understand and integrate AI tools into teaching and learning. In this webinar, David will discuss the challenges and opportunities of AI in authentic assessment and the role of AI literacy. Over to you, David.
Kia ora, Pip. Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou, ko Dave toko ingoa. It's a pleasure to be here for this session on AI and authentic assessment. I've been working a little bit around AI and assessment for a while now, and I'm not claiming I have a lot of answers. I have some questions, but also a lot of talking points that I hope will be useful for you going forward. A little bit of a heads up, there will be some Slido response slides coming up later, so depending on what you prefer to do, if you've got a mobile device, you can always get that ready to scan the QR code, or you can just use your browser, depending on what suits you best. So just a little bit of a heads up, there'll be a couple of those coming up as we go through. This sort of presentation is quite generic about AI on authentic assessment, but with one eye on my audience, I do have a short section at the end where I try and talk specifically about, technology education and in this context. But I also hope to open up to your own responses through one of the Slidos to get your perspective on that particular, your context, I guess. I always like to use a whakatauki for any of the sessions. It's something we do quite regularly at Academy X to try and capture, what's the essence of a particular session. So the whakatauki I've chosen for this evening is this one. Whai a te mataranga he oranga mō koto. Seek after learning for the sake of your well-being. And I think perhaps, learning about AI and learning about how to deal with assessment is perhaps for the sake of our sanity as well. So I'm hoping that, this conversation today will, I don't know, hopefully give you some more sort of ideas or sort of reinforcing thoughts about how we can successfully tackle the challenges and opportunities of, AI in the whole assessment process. Okay, let's make a start. I've got an agenda. I found it quite hard to decide what order to put things in today, so I'm not sure it's the ideal sequence because the trouble with AI is everything sort of comes, it's everything everywhere all at once. I think, you kind of feel like everything's got to be dealt with in one hit. So I tried to sort of break it down a bit. I'm going to ask you in a moment to contribute your own thoughts around the impacts of AI on assessment, and what kind of experiences you'd like to share. I'm then just going to start a sort of high level view of the AI assessment landscape. What's kind of the big picture? What are the main areas we need to focus on? Then I want to talk about how some people have been discussing strategies in the context of AI. So what's AI related assessment like? And then picking apart some of those challenges that I'm sure many of you have already encountered. But then, of course, some people say you should do the opportunities first and then the challenges, but couldn't quite work out how to do that. So I'm going to do the challenges first, and then talk about the opportunities and take a sort of a wayfinding approach. Hopefully that'll be a useful metaphor anyway. And then towards the end, I just want to touch on a couple of my experiences of thinking about AI and assessment in technology education. I mean, the sort of technology I work in is mostly the software end, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts towards the end. At the very end, I'll be asking Lisa from Academy X to just very briefly mention some of our course offerings, but that's not part of the main agenda. Okay, so over to you for the beginning, actually. So the first thing we have is a Slido. I always feel slightly nervous of using Slido because sometimes it seems to misbehave slightly. Um, so here's my question. What are your experiences of the impacts of AI on assessment? And I'm not looking for a particular type at all. So it could be good, it could be bad, it could be indifferent. Neither good nor bad. Just anything that you'd like to share about your experiences of AI on assessment in your contexts and practice. You can either use the QR code on the top left there, or if you're using a browser, you can just go to slido.com and then you can put that number in. And just for my own sanity, I'm going to just check the QR code myself to make sure that it's going to work. Okay. So this is a long answer question, by the way. So you can write, well, I'm not sure what the maximum is, but you can write as much as you like and then send it.
So, David, um, can we see your slides?
Oh, I am so sorry.
That's all
That
good.
was a terrible start, wasn't it?
That's all right.
After we went through that thing at the beginning about let's check that you
Let's
can
check.
share
Yeah,
your slides,
that's the one.
and yeah, I consider that a bit of a Biden moment. Sorry about that. So hopefully now on the screen you can
So we
see.
we can see your desktop.
Oh my God.
We practiced this. It was
We
it
did,
was
we
great.
practiced it,
It
but
was totally
it
fine.
doesn't mean
This is what live webinars are all about.
I'm not utterly incompetent. The real worry
There
for me
we go.
never gets better, right? I mean, I've been using Zoom forever, and I still do this. I get so carried away with my wonderful ideas that I fail to share them with anybody on the screen. So I apologize for that. I hope now the thing is there, you
Yes,
will
we
be
can
able
see
to.
slido.com. Yep, and the code.
Thank God. Okay, what an excellent start that was. Still, I think it's always good to, show that we're fallible, although maybe not too much. I'm very relieved to see a message at the top of the screen saying that participants are typing, so I feel I feel reassured. Okay. Yeah, it's fine if you haven't used it. I mean, that's also useful to know. And if you haven't, used it at all, I'm hoping that you'll be able to take some ideas away today for ways that you could, as an educator in assessment, use it, and also, how your students might be able to use it in positive ways. Yeah, how can we stop cheating? Well, that's a big question. And I'll definitely be talking about that later. Yeah, so this is someone who's got a bit of a positive experience about it so far. Yeah, students not being transparent. I will touch on that as well later. Yeah, mitigating. Yeah, mitigating is the right word, isn't it? We have to mitigate the challenges. Um, okay, okay. Yeah, the copying and pasting, of course, it's definitely an issue, isn't it? There's no question. We can't pretend it's not happening. But again, there are some other positives here, which is good to see. So there is a mix, isn't there? I mean, please do carry on putting stuff in. But the reason that we're talking both about challenges and opportunities is that those things are both there. So, we have to try and okay, how do we deal with those challenges and how do we take those opportunities? Um, okay. SLT uses AI to put words in my mouth. Yeah, I have similar issues with our marketing team actually. Um, hmm. Yeah, PD as well. I know, there's lots of things coming through here, and so there's clearly a big range here of experiences and ideas and concerns, but also a few people who are clearly finding benefits. Um, okay, cool. Thank you. I see there's a couple more people still typing, so interesting to see that NZQA are using it to mark. Again, the thing about using it to assess, I will be picking that question up a little bit later as well. Um, cool. Okay, thank you for sharing all of those things. That's really good. Yeah, yes, pen and paper is coming back. It is, isn't it? Well, for better or worse. Okay, thank you for that. That's great. Thanks for all of those ideas. Let me go back to sort of big picture, and we'll hopefully a lot of those things will come out of the discussion as we go through. This figure, of course, was generated with AI using Napkin. I'm sure many of you have tried using Napkin. Um, I wanted to just sort of pick out, on the top left-hand side of this, I've got what I think is the biggest picture, if you like, the challenges and the opportunities. What does it mean for us as educators? What does it mean for our learners within the world of AI? And that's such a big thing to unpick, that I wanted to kind of at least break it down into three main areas that I'll talk about in more detail. So the bottom left-hand side is probably the one that we think about the most, which is what do we do about students using it for assessment? How do we guide them to use it well, effectively, and so on? Um, on the right-hand side, I've got two things that relate to staff. So using AI in assessment design. So we can use AI ourselves to make better assessments. And then, of course, potentially, and there are ethical issues here, and I'll talk about those in a moment, we can use it to some extent for grading and feedback. So I'm just going to start off by picking those things on the right, because in a sense, they're slightly less contentious. Like, what about AI and assessment as educators? Um, I think there's there's a dual role, isn't there? I mean, we can use AI ourselves, and we know that students will use it, and sometimes it'll be when we're allowing them or wanting them to use it, and sometimes not. But there's a cycle here, so I just wanted to dig a little bit into this sort of assessment cycle. So if we start with, we might use AI to help us create assessments. Under each of these sort of three things, I've got a whole bunch of indicative ideas, and of course there could be loads and loads of these. So these are not exhaustive, but um, when we use AI for assessments, it might suggest some tasks that we want to give to students. It might help us to align our assessments to learning outcomes, um, or it might allow us, for example, to create multiple assessments that are personalized to different students. There are many, many ways in which potentially it could help us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then, of course, we write an assessment, we give it to the students, and there's an enormous range of ways in which a student might perhaps use AI to assist, hopefully, the completion of that assessment. Again, this is just a small sample of possibilities. They might brainstorm with it. They might use it to help structure their essays. They might use it for literature searches. They might use it to analyze data. They might use it to get their own formative feedback by checking what they've done against the assessment criterion. And in many ways, these are kind of good ways they could use AI, but there are many others. And so they finish it with or without the help of AI. They hand it in, and then potentially, of course, we might use it for grading. We might use it to create a rubric or a marking scheme. We might use it to get some feedback. I think the big question here, of course, is transparency. So if we were to use AI to help us create assessments, and if we were to use AI to help us grade assessments, it would be a shade hypocritical for us to tell students they are not allowed to use AI when they're doing the assessments. So I kind of feel like one of the first steps in here is we need to have those honest conversations with students about where and when AI is or isn't going to be a thing that could or should be used. And I think perhaps the most sensitive one here is whether AI should be used for grading, because it can be, but there's a lot of layers to that. And I will talk about that a little bit later when I'm going to talk briefly about Brisk as one example of that. So we'll pick that up in a moment. So there's that cycle of three areas where AI and assessment has to be considered. So I just wanted to talk briefly about those two sort of teacher side issues, if you like. First one is, AI for creating assessments. So we all know that ideally assessments should be fair and valid and reliable and clearly aligned with learning outcomes. So there's a few things to consider here. Constructive alignment. So these things, AI can be really good for this. It can help us to clarify, okay, I've got this assessment. These are my learning outcomes. Do they align? Have I actually covered these learning outcomes in my assessment? Am I over assessing stuff that isn't a learning outcome? So constructive alignment can be quite useful. And then the next step from constructive alignment is backward design, where, we've got our outcomes, we develop the assessments, and then we develop the teaching strategies. And I don't know how many of you have used AI to help you, to suggest things that you could do with students. I've certainly tried it. Sometimes it's quite good and comes up with some interesting ideas. Sometimes it comes up with patent nonsense. But I mean, that's what we live with, isn't it? It's about understanding, taking the good bits that it can come up with, and knowing that other bits can be safely rejected. Um, so again, AI can give us that partner in creating better assessments. And of course, if we think about assessment for learning, if we're looking at formative assessment, AI can be very good at, comparing something a student has done to a rubric or a set of assessment criteria. And there are other areas where it can help us. We can use AI to make suggestions around how we can make assessments more inclusive or culturally responsive. I mean, at a very simple level, you can run some text through and say, can you make this more readable for someone with dyslexia, for example? There are so many small ways in which AI can help us to make a better assessment. So I think that's one sort of positive view of how AI can help us with not only authentic assessment, but better assessment. And then when it comes back again, what about grading? Well, it's tempting to use AI to grade. There's a really interesting thing in Justin Reich's book, where he talks about educational technology. And he's there back in the 1930s when Sidney Pressey invented the first sort of teaching machine. The student magazine had this article saying, okay, well, now we've got this teaching machine. What we'll do is we'll just, we'll build our own machine to just go and answer the questions, and then we can just go out onto the quad and have a nice day and learn stuff. And of course, that whole thing about, AI creates it, AI grades it, is a sort of ridiculous nightmare scenario that we have to be constantly aware of. But there are some quite useful AI tools that can assist us with grading. I have to say, I haven't used Brisk in anger. And one of the reasons is that a lot of the assessments that I'm dealing with are videos, or they're kind of practical based things. We don't have many things that are just written. But if you haven't used Brisk before, I know a lot of teachers have been using it. What I like about it is the give feedback option, particularly the aspect, there's the give feedback button over there. There's the targeted feedback. And what targeted feedback does is it can take a student piece of writing and it can add comments into a Google Doc. And I think this is quite interesting. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you would just sort of, generate some comments and give it back to the student. But if you can put in a rubric, you can, prompt it in the things that you want to show improvement in, and then it will generate some comments. You can edit them, you can delete them, you can add your own. But I think it's one of those things that can help you to mark better. So it's worth thinking about. But again, I mean, I wouldn't recommend using any of these things without explaining to students that that's what you're doing and how you're using it and why you think it's better than you just doing it yourself. So that's the things about, what's it like from the educator side? Where can we use AI in potentially positive ways? Um, Before we go any further, I wanted to do another Slido, and this one is a much broader one. What tasks do you use AI for? And I don't just mean with assessment or even just your work, but anything. What do you use AI for in your whole life, whether it's your professional life or your personal life? This is a word cloud, unlike the last one, which was kind of long answer. So if you could try and keep your answers kind of really short, 1 or 2 words, so that it becomes, cloudy, that would be awesome. So I'll just give you a minute to share whatever you like in there. Be interesting to see what you come up with. Just pause a moment until we've got some perhaps more popular ideas. Or maybe there are so many ideas that they won't be duplicated because there's just so many things that you can do. Funding applications, yeah, I had to go at that. Um, Again, the thing about funding applications is that, it's effectively a rubric, isn't it? You've got this giant form with all this stuff to fill in. So I found by filling in as much as I could and then asking it to tell me what was terrible about it, that was definitely helpful. Clearly, from the screen, image generation is super popular, um, unsurprisingly, because it's just so entertaining. And it replaces that awful thing, doesn't it, where you want some clip art and you spend hours trying to find some free clip art that actually says what you want. And this kind of overcomes it. What else have we got? Oh, so many things, actually. So many things. um Recipes I think lots of people possibly do that in real life. Quizzes, lesson plans, checking grammar, how to talk to a parent. Interesting. Cool. What else? Product comparisons, worksheets, legal, um, emails. Yeah, loads of things. I mean, it's really cool to see that there's like just masses of things that you use AI for. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's a generic tool. It can do many, many things that we want to do. And some of the things that you've talked about are to do with your role, your professional role, and some of them are not. They're about your sort of broader life, and I think that's cool. Was I think Jerry Harris did a presentation on site from AUT the other day, and when she asks this question, she gets things like everything. I use AI for everything. Well, I'm not sure you can use it for absolutely everything, but the idea is that you could use it for lots, I guess. Awesome. So, why did I ask you this question? Well, the thing is, we're all using AI, a lot, and it will be kind of odd to all use AI and then sort of expect students not to. Now, I totally understand, of course, that this is there's an age issue here, isn't there? A lot of these tools are not intended for, say, under 13s. Some of them have a higher age group. So, there is that, whether students should be using AI because of their age is a whole different issue to whether they should be using it for authentic assessment. But let's assume that they're old enough that they can use AI. It's difficult for us to be doing all of these things and then not letting the students use it. So I think we have to accept that AI is here. Students will want to use it, and that creates those problems, issues, opportunities that we have to deal with. Cool. Thanks for all those responses you put onto the Slido. Loads of things there, and I see people are still typing. Um, so that's cool. I haven't dared use it for a travel itinerary yet, but I think that's a good idea as well. Right, yes, there's lots of things that we can use it for. Right, so let's come back to what does this mean for us? So we're in this situation now where AI is kind of all over the place. Students are very likely going to use it. What does it mean for the authenticity of our assessments? That's our big question, isn't it? So um, does it mean ultimately that we've got a very clear dichotomy? Does it mean that we respond like I think it was Victoria University decided that their law exam would have to be written with a pen and paper? Is that what we have to do? So only use secure invigilated assessments where we know students can't use AI? Or do we rethink what we mean by assessment and embrace AI? Is it, one question is it that simple? Is it okay when we assess, we're gonna police it and we're gonna know what they're doing because it's invigilated, or do we just completely change the way we assess? And are there other ways of thinking about it? Is it black and white, or are there sort of shades of grey? So I think that's one question that we need to address. Um, Possibly the most well-known view of this is what's called the two-lane approach in the University of Sydney, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this already. Um, so it differentiates between assessment of learning, which is lane one, and that's kind of your traditional stuff. It's like end of program, final exam, those kinds of things. So if you like that sort of traditional type of assessments that we've had, external exams and so on. And then lane two is assessment as learning, where we are critically and creatively, hopefully, using AI. So we want students to be using AI, not as a substitute, but as a co-pilot. So that's how they've sort of broken it down and said, well, some of your assessments will be lane one, and some of your assessments will be lane two. Um, and so, big sort of high stakes program assessments will be like, invigilated final exams. And then the things that you do in your courses and so on might be things where AI is involved. There are other ways of thinking about it. I mean, I don't think we only have to think about two extremes. This is from an interesting slide set from City University in the UK, where they talk about, the first one is effectively lane one, but they also talk about we might think about outrunning AI. So setting assessments that AI is not going to do a very good job. So, effectively the students have to do the work because AI is not going to be very good at it. This of course is a moving target, and so that's a bit of a problem. So it's something that we have to bear in mind, and I'll show you a little video clip in a moment that I think highlights that issue. And then the alternative is similar to lane two, where we let students use AI and take a critical approach. But there might be possible other ways of thinking about it and ways of sort of slicing and dicing the AI use in different ways. Anyway, just a thought. Um, Very briefly, I don't want to spend time on this because if you're interested, you can look at what the University of Sydney have on their website. Um, but their suggestions for lane ones are just what you'd expect, right? Exams, in-semester tests, in-class assessments, placements, internships, supervisions, things that very clearly have a level of invigilation or observation in them. So you know that the students are demonstrating their learning. And then their lane two assessments. These are the ones where you're assuming that students will in some way be including AI, including you'll notice written work. Um, but even quizzes, so using AI to help answer quizzes, but then being critical about whether AI comes up with the right answers. This could be a useful learning thing. So yeah, practice, application, production, creation, inquiry, investigation, discussion, and so on. All of these have some detail on the websites, so if you're interested, you can read more about them. But I mean, this is kind of what they're saying, that you've got things that are more traditional, and then you've got other ways of assessing, but they will have AI in them. So that's how they look at it. I wanted to play a little clip of a Danny Liu video. So Danny Liu's one of the people that works on this stuff at University of Sydney. Um, and one of the things that's often seen about an alternative to traditional assessment is interactive oral assessments, where you get the student in front of you and you ask them questions, and it seems like a very good idea. But just thinking about that, trying to outrun AI, there's a nice little example here of how we have to be careful not to assume that something is safe from AI. I'm just going to play a little clip of this video as it comes to the end.
What about live oral assessments? There are some AI tools out there that can support these, but let's have a look at a free one called Ecoute. Ecoute runs on your computer and listens to the conversation that you're having with someone over a video call. Not only that, it also uses a large language model like GPT-4o to generate suggested responses. Let's see it in action. I've asked Ben to be my examiner and ask me some questions from his field of expertise, which I have no clue about.
Thanks for coming, Denny, for your exam today in a course on rhetoric and communication. The goal today is that we can check in on your knowledge about the course concepts. So could you start by telling me how you would define classical rhetoric?
So rhetoric to me is how we persuade through communication. It involves things like understanding and using different techniques to convey messages that influence an audience. So this includes the use of ethos, pathos, and logos, as well as considering how the audience might respond to this and tailoring the message to them appropriately.
Excellent. And a major challenge we've spoken about in the course is how you adapt communication for multicultural
Oh.
audiences. Have you considered this at all? And do you have any research sources that might support you in this understanding?
Yeah, so it's really important in this kind of context to adapt to multicultural audiences. It involves understanding their cultural differences and how they communicate, maybe their styles, values, and also expectations. I think it's important to be culturally sensitive and aware of these nonverbal cues, which is really important when you do communication. So things like language nuances and context and those kind of things. I've looked into sources like Hofstadter, cultural dimensions theory, and also Hall's work on high context and low context cultures. And these provide valuable insights into these differences.
Wow, that was really impressive. Yeah, I can't believe it. It's those answers are at a standard that we would get in first year writing, definitely. And then when you brought in the research, I was thinking that's sort of equivalent to second year levels.
Okay, so I mean that's fascinating, I think, but it just goes to show we do need to be aware of what AI is capable of when we're trying to decide whether an assessment might be able to outrun AI. So there are a lot of challenges for us, aren't there? So we know, and from some of your comments earlier, AI can undermine learning. So students can submit work they didn't create themselves, and sometimes it's blindingly obvious because they haven't even attempted to edit it. Um, and then there are also problems around, even if we're trying to use AI well, encouraging students to use AI, it might be biased. So, they might be thinking they're using it well and it's coming out with all sorts of biased stuff. It might reduce human interaction that they would otherwise have had, say, with peers or with educators. It can disproportionately impact students with unequal access. So, this whole thing about digital divides get even worse. Um, so there are those problems. Some people suggest that, okay, so the products now we have to be suspicious of the product because the product might have come from AI. So let's focus on the process. And I think, that's possibly a good idea. But if we think about some of the suggestions that are made, so I've heard people suggesting things like, oh, well, students have to write down every AI prompt they wrote and show us what they came up with, and then show us what they did with that and how they edited it and so on. Life's too short. I'm not going to mark that. I mean, that seems like an insane way of, AI makes our workload heavier is not my not my vision of the future. And the other thing is, it's all very well to say process over product, but the product is still important. What's the point of a good process if the product is no good? So we also have to take account of that as well. So I think saying the process is important, maybe more important than the product, has some value, but we have to be a bit careful about that one. And then, of course, there's how do we police anything, right? So how do we might tell students, oh, we'd like you to use this and not that, but how do we know? Um, and the trouble is that, policing is unreliable. It might disadvantage students. And I just wanted to talk about that point a little bit more by just talking about AI detectors, which some of you are probably aware of. We use Turnitin, have done for years at Academy EX, and if you use Turnitin as a plagiarism checker, although we like to think of it as a formative writing assistant, so we let the students, try their own work out in Turnitin as many times as they like. In that, there's now an AI detector that some of you may have used. The problem is that, reliable detection is almost impossible. So we know that yes, they do generate correct positives, but they also generate false positives and false negatives. And those false positives can disproportionately affect non-native speakers because these tools only operate on style. They don't operate on content. And so style, if you have a particular style, you might get flagged as being writing like AI. And there are an increasing number of tools that, humanizers that can take AI text and then, mess with the style to make it less likely to be found by these tools. And of course students know this. They're all over TikTok with advice on how to cheat the AI detectors, so they might have some value, but really you can only use them to support some kind of discussion. And indeed, even Turnitin themselves in their guide for AI generated text talk about a whole range of strategies, including, we need to motivate students with better tasks, and focus on critical thinking and so on. So even the people who make the tool suggest that they can only be a small component of your overall strategy. And perhaps the most valuable role is they can maybe highlight poorly assigned assessment tasks. So if we find ourselves, wanting to use an AI detector, maybe we need to think about, well, is this the right sort of assessment for learning, or are we just going to go down this horrible rabbit hole of constantly trying to work out whether this was written by AI or not? So I think, it's thinking about the way we assess rather than trying to find a tool to find, students cheating. So where do we go from here? Well, I kind of wanted to get away from the, running as fast as we can to keep up or get ahead of AI, because that seems to me to be, not easy. So I thought I'd take a bit of a cue from the Wayfinding Leadership website, which is linked to the book about wayfinding leadership, and it talks about, the navigator not traveling but sitting still, listening to and reading signals from the environment, taking necessary action so the destination appears to come to the navigator. And I thought maybe what, as a sort of a metaphor, what we need to maybe do is kind of stop trying to run away and just, listen and look and read signals from the environment and think about what they're saying to us about the way we assess and what we can do about that. And I think one of the aspects is we have to sort of take a step back and say, it's not like we had this fantastic assessment system that was great and then AI came along and ruined it all. I mean, that's not true, because we know that a traditional assessment's not perfect. There's lots of limitations. It can be burdensome for educators, those big pile of things to mark. Providing sort of just discrete snapshots of learning, not being adaptable, failing to assess, modern skills, preparing students for work and so on. So we've known for a long time that maybe a lot of aspects of traditional assessment haven't been great. And we also know that cheating, has been around forever, really. So it wasn't something that suddenly appeared with AI. In fact, I've seen some stats from MIT that suggested that, students aren't cheating any more with AI than they were before. They're just cheating in a way that makes it a bit more obvious, maybe. There's lots of ways in which students have cheated. I got this picture some time ago from DALI 3 with my prompt, a student paying someone else to write an essay for them. I kept this one rather than a more sort of efficient ChatGPT one because I thought it was highly amusing with its terrible writing. But yeah, this whole thing about, students have been potentially, paying essay mills to write their work for a long time. So, we can't pretend that we had this great system that was foolproof before, but maybe now we're sort of having to face that. And then the other thing is, students don't necessarily cheat because they're evil, bad people. There are lots of reasons why students cheat. I mean, it might be that they're just struggling and they can't get help. They might have just too much work to do, or they might have an assessment and they think that it's pointless. They can't see the value in doing that assessment. And they often panic. I mean, we find sometimes if we see students who are clearly done the copy and paste job in an essay or something, that it's usually because they're already struggling and it's a last resort. They know they don't really want to do it, but they don't know what else to do. So cheating's generally a symptom of a deeper systemic problem. So we have to think about what is it that we want to do with assessment rather than pretending that it was great before and let's stick with it and let's do written exams. This is a little video clip from University of New South Wales, and I think it kind of captures the essence of, like where do we need to go? What are we trying to reach to in the future?
As an educator, some of the main challenges that generative AI presents us with is the stark fact that the assessment tasks that we get students to do, which usually involves them generating some kind of an artifact, whether it be an essay or an exam paper or a performance, a lot of those artifacts can now be produced to at least a good enough standard by a robot. So we have to accept that at least some of how we've currently designed assessment and feedback to work is now at risk. So we need to, the challenge really for a teacher, for an educator, is to think, okay, now what? What do I do? How do I move beyond this into a place where I can be more confident that I'm measuring genuine student learning? The other side of the coin, of course, is that we have to accept that these tools exist. They're in the world of work. they're actually going to start to infiltrate the very tools that most of us use in our professional daily lives. So the whole question that we've got to think about is, on the one hand, we need to be confident that we've seen that the student can do the work themselves. But on the other side of that coin, we have to ask ourselves, well, in a world where ChatGPT exists, what is the work? That's the challenge. The key focus that a teacher has to keep is on the learning. We should be designing assessment for and as learning. In other words, we should be designing it for the students who would never cheat. But on the other side of things, in some ways we have to kind of give up on being too distracted by how students are cheating. We need to sort of sweep away the technologies, the techniques, the strategies they're using to cheat, and focus in instead on learning. So the way I'm describing it to people at the moment is to say, stop trying to find evidence that proves that cheating has occurred, and instead try to find evidence that learning has occurred. That allows you to keep your teacher hat on and also reframes the relationship you've got with your students and the process we're all going through when we do assessment, feedback, grading, marking. We need to turn our attention to the really important proposition of how do we empty the value of cheating from our courses and focus instead on assuring learning.
Cool. Okay, I think that's quite a nice video in terms of capturing, where we want to go. So I'm sort of moving towards sort of wrapping up some ideas here. So if we want to think about positive use of AI in assessment, I think there's kind of three big pathways to follow. On the right-hand side of this napkin figure, I've got authentic assessment. So this idea about assessments that accurately measure learning, regardless of what the role of AI is. How do we focus on the learning part? And in order to sort of encourage students to engage with that, we need to provide using AI in ways that enhance learning and critical thinking, so that the students are kind of doing it in a way that works for learning. And part of that is that sort of transparency and honesty thing about, we don't want students to hide using AI. We want them to know that they can use AI and have open conversations with them about how it can or shouldn't be used. Another quick suggestion from Danny Liu. This is a different video. You might have come across this idea that we can give students traffic lights, and like there's some of the tasks we do are the red ones, like that you can't use AI. Well, there are green ones where you can use whatever you like, but then there are also sort of orange and yellow ones in between where like, oh, you can do this but not that. As Danny Liu says in this video, you can't enforce any of that, so you maybe have to flip it around and make it more of an offer rather than a rule. This is a useful little analogy, I think, that may be helpful to some.
So we've seen a few examples of how students might use AI as part of their assessment, and not necessarily in ways that will always help them learn. The reality is that there are a whole set of different ways that AI could be used in the process of assessment. We can't limit, prevent, or detect students' use of AI in any of these ways. So there's no point really in going around saying as an assignment, this is an orange assignment where you can only use AI for brainstorming, or this is a yellow assignment where you can only use AI for editing, or this is a green assignment where you can only use AI for drafting some text. As Phil Dawson says, restrictions which are unenforceable will hurt the assessment validity. So our approach at the University of Sydney is to take a menu analogy. When you go to a restaurant, the role of the staff there is to help you to navigate the menu and to pick what is healthiest for you to eat based on your allergies, your needs, and your appetite. This menu analogy matches the reality that there are many ways that AI could be used, and it's not as simple as a traffic light system or a scale that you can slide along. When you go to a restaurant, you could eat anything on the menu, and if you eat everything on the menu, then you're going to get sick. An alternative take might be to say to students, these are all the ways that you could use AI, and we know you could use AI in all these ways. We're going to support you. We're going to say and show you how, for example, for assessment 1, maybe these are the most useful ways to use AI, and for assessment 2, these are the most helpful and healthiest ways to use AI. We've seen some examples in this video of some ways that AI can be used by students, and our role as educators is to help them understand the healthy choices and how to engage with AI productively and responsibly.
Okay, well, it's an interesting idea. It doesn't sort of explain exactly how we achieve it, but it's an idea. Another thing that I I saw recently, and it was actually in a Facebook post by a teacher in the US. Um, Her particular post was about, trying to ban AI in the classroom, but the way that she was discussing what she did, I thought could be used in a slightly different way. And I thought it's a kind of a way of thinking about flipped learning. Um, Flipping assessment tasks, and the idea is that if students are doing stuff at home, they're doing sort of preparation at home, flip learning, we've got no idea whether they're using AI or not. So let's accept that and say, well, they can possibly use AI to learn. So we give them something that we want them to do to learn for their flip learning tasks, and then we bring them in the classroom, and then we use that knowledge. Um, and the AI is either not used, or it's being, the use of the AI is managed because we're doing it in the classroom. Um, and the idea then is that students develop and demonstrate that learning, whether or not that learning came sort of from an AI doesn't really matter. The idea is that the learning is applied in a face-to-face context. So I thought that was an interesting way of thinking about it. You bring the assessment into the classroom as part of the learning, and then the AI role is there, but it's kind of a background assistant. One of the other aspects to this, I think, is like, well, don't these other strategies all take longer? Like, am I going to end up just having to spend more and more time? Possibly, I guess. I mean, a couple of examples really. One of the things that's being done quite a lot these days is those interactive oral assessments. We've seen that doing those online might be a bit dodgy, but face to face, they can be very valuable. And some people think it's just going to be really time consuming. The University of Auckland on their website have a discussion around this and say that they're using these interactive oral assessments a lot, and that once everybody's kind of got used to that process, it doesn't really take any longer because you're doing the assessing as you're talking to the students. So your overall time spent is probably about the same as it was when the students handed it in and you had to go away and mark it. So that's something to bear in mind. Um, when I read the article on Facebook, or the post on Facebook, where the teacher was kind of assessing in the classroom, she said a lot of my colleagues were saying, look, you're spending far too long assessing now. You're spending ages doing assessment. And she said, no, I'm not. I'm doing learning through which assessment is also being done. So yes, I might have spent my whole day doing assessment, but it wasn't just, assessment of learning. It was learning as an assessment process. So I guess at the end of the day, it's about, we have to find ways of blending the assessment and the learning together in ways where we can know that it's authentic. I felt it was important, given the audience, to at least acknowledge, what about technology education? Because of course AI is a natural partner, isn't it? I mean, AI is a technology. I just took this little quote from the World Economic Forum to highlight the thing about AI presents an avenue through which students can improve digital literacy, and prepare for future jobs and so on. So of course it's a very relevant and valid thing to do in technology education. And I very briefly wanted to mention, at the beginning, one of the things that was talked about was that I'm one of the people who worked on this SAIL framework, but I think using AI literacy competencies can help to anchor those technology tasks. So you can take, I chose the level 2 one because it's, probably appropriate for students who are doing technology learning more than level 1, perhaps a little bit more kind of about using and applying. But you can kind of use these as ways of broadening the discussion so students get that meta level about AI. They're not just using it, but they're thinking about how it's being used and the value of that and what the pitfalls might be, and developing their sort of AI literacy. I've just realized this is a slightly old screen dump. It doesn't say AI literacy on AI digital citizenship on the right, but it doesn't really matter. The idea is that you can kind of pick these competencies to support the other learning that takes place. My own sort of experience, really, in terms of this kind of discussing this is, I teach a software micro-credential, software development level 8 thing. And I have to, I've had to acknowledge over the last year or so that, developers are using AI all the time. They're using GitHub Copilot. I use that quite a bit, or other IDEs like Cursor. Or some people just use LLMs, and Claude seems to be the favorite one. I just put a little screen dump on the right hand side of the Claude coding interface, which provides a few examples, including vibe coding that you may have heard of, which is like I code by just chatting to an LLM, although the person who came up with it did suggest that it isn't really fit for purpose for anything other than sort of toy applications. But nevertheless, people are using this stuff, so there's no point talking about software without acknowledging this. And of course, there are lots of other AI tools that can be used at different parts of the software development lifecycle. Just one example would be, UI to code with Builder. I think there are lots of examples. So I think this is one of the things where, we have to think about what we're assessing maybe differently. We might have assessed code in the past. We might have asked students to write code, and then we might assess that code. Well, now maybe that's a bit pointless. We need to think more about those more conceptual things like architecture and design. So I think that's one way in which AI is impacting on the nature of the assessment. And something I've been looking at lately is we recently got a new 3D printer, and I was thinking about, is it worth doing AI design? So I've been playing around with Meshy. It's still a bit rubbish, to be honest, but it's so much better than it was a couple of years ago that clearly it's going to get better and better. Students can put in a prompt, they get a 3D design. There's a few examples I was messing around with on the right there. And then you can take those designs and put them into a modeling tool. And so again, I'm kind of thinking it's not just about can students create a 3D designed, a design to print something in 3D, because you can do that with a prompt, but it's more about how can you iteratively refine something that an AI tool comes up with, and then assess the the improvements the student make. Again, coming back to that, let's focus on the process as well as the product, but hopefully in ways that don't increase our workload too terrifyingly. So just to kind of wrap that little bit up, what I wanted to do is get some of your sort of expertise here. Um, and I appreciate that from the first sort of chat that many of you haven't used AI yet. But if you have, I'll be very interested to see what role AI plays in your technology assessments, either for you, we talked about the fact that we might use AI to, say, write assessments or even grade them, or your students. So this is the last of my Slidos. You've also been asked if you want to share any questions in the Q&A. So of course, please do that as well if there's anything you would like to add. I'll wrap up in a minute, and then we'll do the Q&A, and then at the very end, I'll just pass over to Lisa to maybe chat very briefly through a couple of slides around some of Academy EX's course offerings. Yeah, makes rubrics for me and refines them. I'm very fussy. I played earlier, University of New South Wales video, and they've got several. And what I like about it is that they got two videos. The first one is it makes a rubric for me, and then I kind of I prompt to tidy it up a bit. And then the second one is I carry on prompting, and then I keep prompting and then I think there's that interesting point, isn't there, where when do I stop using prompts to try and fix something, and I just do it myself. And I think that's I think a combination of those is really where the strength lies, isn't it? Where AI can get us started, it can help us kind of get that framework together, and then we can go in there and we can make it what we actually want it to be. Yeah, pre and post moderation. Yeah, yes, great. I mean, it's really good, isn't it? You can take an assessment and you can run it through an AI, and it's quite good at critiquing, isn't it? I mean, it's one of its strengths is giving feedback on stuff. Yeah, developing tests, quizzes, absolutely. I mean, it's again, they're often a little bit lame. Typically these AI quiz things will have a lot of those all of the above, and every time you see an all of the above, it's true. Whereas, of course, that's a really lousy way of writing a quiz. But you can tweak that so that it's not always all of the above, and then you get more challenging quizzes. Right, what else have we got? Oh yeah, AI technology and pattern designing. Nice. Yep, generate feedback. Yeah, I think, as a grading partner, I think, feedback, things like Brisk, I mean, I think they can be very good tools, I think. Adjusting rubrics. Um, Yeah, certainly for students, there are limitations on NCEA assessment. That's for sure. Refining ideas, planning, yeah, feasibility. Um, yeah, I like that. Yeah, I now have higher expectations. That's a really nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? Yes, you're going to use AI. So, I'm no longer going to accept a sort of bland and waffly essay that I might have given you 50% for before. Now it's a fail. I'm expecting a lot more. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. That's quite cool. I see there's one more participant typing at the moment, so I'm just going to pause. Here we go. Oh yeah, Kahoot questions. Yeah, that's good, isn't it? Yeah, so you can get it to generate questions, and then when you put it in Kahoot, it's much more exciting to do than a standard quiz. So yeah, combining different digital tools together, and of course, all of the tools we use regularly are increasingly having more and more AI, aren't they? So the AI is now embedded in things like Educa Play, for example. You can have the AI generate your quizzes and sort of game-like activities. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I just very quickly sort of mention this slide, and then I'll stop, and then we'll see if we've got any Q&A. So, I mean, ultimately, I think this generative AI isn't just a challenge; it's an invitation for us to innovate in whatever ways we think it works for us. And we can rethink assessment, and not just for like today's AI, what is it doing now, but what do learners need for tomorrow? What kind of skills and knowledge and understandings do they need? So ultimately, potentially the future of assessment is AI informed, but student centered, inclusive, integrated with learning, focused on preparing learners for a rapidly changing world. That sounds very AI, doesn't it? Okay, I will stop sharing there because that's kind of the end of my main presentation. And yeah, so Pip, do we have any
Yes, we
questions?
have one question in the Q&A. Hi, David. I agree with your pitch, but I've been thinking a lot about authentic assessment, and I'm struggling with assessing learning at
Mm,
scale. For example, 600 students in a course in first year without
mm.
focusing on the artifacts produced in secure conditions. We can shift more to design in theory, but AI can do design too. Any artifact we can think of, create or not, we anticipate that AI will be able to produce it within the next couple of years. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I've often wondered about this because when I started at Massey University in 2003, and I used to teach the first year information systems paper, we had about 500 students. Um, and one of the things that was very clear then was that a lot of students were not doing their own work. And I did end up not for everything, but doing things like getting students into the lab to do some practical tasks. I mean, it's time consuming because there's only so many students you can get in at a time, and so those tasks have to be quite short. I mean, I don't have any great answers for this because it is a real problem when you've got a very large number of students. Um, and I think a lot of the solutions that people come up with are great if you've got a small class. But if you said, well, I'm going to do interactive oral assessments with 500 students, I guess it depends what else you would have got them to do, because marking 500 scripts would also be incredibly time consuming.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, like the word that comes up a lot is performance. Like, can students perform in some way? Can you see students actually perform rather than just give you something or say something? Um, I think that's our challenge, and I'm not claiming that it's easy, but I think we always have to think about what's the performative element that we might be able to see students doing and capture in some way, whether it's, a video or it's live or whatever it might be, whether it's a TikTok post, I don't know, but something where they're doing something other than just sort of generating something and handing it in. But it's a great question. I wish I had a really good answer.
So, with that in mind, do you think our NCA assessments are still fit for purpose?
Have they ever been fit for purpose? I mean, I think, the questions about assessment have always been ongoing. Like, are we really assessing learning? Um, and what does it mean when we give someone a piece of paper that says they can do this thing? Um, and I think it's always been a problem because students are always on a continuum anyway. So we have a student who kind of scrapes a competent or a 50% of something with a number on it, and and they're assumed to be able to do something. but are they really? I feel like that all of the things that are happening now are just opening up a can of worms that was always there about whether assessment was really fit for purpose. And so we might, and I'm not sure that NZQA, indeed, many of the things that we do for assessment are really fit for purpose, to be honest.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time, so should we hand over to Lisa to talk about Academy X?
Yes, by all means.
Yeah.
Let me just, I'll put the slides up, Lisa, and you can just talk over them if you wish. This is our first one.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for having us. I just wanted to talk really briefly about a couple of programs that you may be interested in. We do really high level the Mind Lab Academic EX has been around since 2013. We're really non-traditional and really practical. So the postgrad certificate in digital and collaborative learning is contemporary skills, but just as much changing the pedagogy of teaching to student-led resilience, failure, really powerful stuff. We get whole schools doing the program, from principals to teachers to librarians to Syncos. Primary, secondary, tertiary, uni, corporate, and in fact we've had health doing that program. The program's 32 weeks with one session live online of 90 minutes a week with 4 assessments, 2 of which can be done collaboratively, break them up, work to your strengths and submit them together. And the last assessment's in innovation on neural practice. So again, very, very practical. There's an intake coming up in August and we have a limited number of 50% scholarships available. That postgrad is the first third of our Master of Contemporary Education. The main focus of that Masters is a change project of your choice. It could be your work focus, your passion, it's up to you. We'll walk alongside you to get that thing done. The Masters is in 3 parts. The first part can be the postgrad. The second part, looking at what might be your project, the research, ethics, and more. And part 3 is you implementing that change. So your school, your students, your community feel the ripples of benefit from you doing that program. There's intakes coming up in July for those who have done the postgrad, so starting at part 2, and August for those starting at part 1. We have a limited number of scholarships available for either just the part 2 and 3 or the whole journey. I will take you through that if you could go on to the next slide. The scholarships are Tangata Whenua, Pacific Arco, Taipeki over 60 and Impact for those with the intent to do good for the world, people, and the planet. We see educators as servant leaders, so you're all eligible to apply for at least one of those scholarships. We also have a range of ideas and tools to for ideas for funding your study, including our early bird discount. We've got templates to approach your work, there's study link, and please just reach out to me. I'm here to help if you have any questions. How to apply? You apply to do a program on our website, but equally at the same time you apply for our scholarship. And the scholarship application is pretty easy. There are leading questions with not huge expected answers that can be done in text or video. And we just want you to be you. So talk about your why and what you hope to achieve from doing the program. In the next slide, we'll have my contact details.
Oh, sorry, Lisa, I clicked on the wrong thing.
That's all right.
There we go.
So if you have any questions, that's my email and my phone number. I'm here to help. Please just reach out.
Thank you so much. Great opportunities for for the teachers watching. Okay, so I'm just going to share my slides again. So thank you so much to David today. If you would like to share your feedback on what you would like to see for future webinars, there's a QR code there. If you want to continue the conversation, ask some questions around AI and assessment, please go to our ARCOR website forum space and ask your questions there. Our next Wednesday webinar is about New Zealand aquabots with the Ministry of Inspiration, a competition coming up. So please sign up for that one. That will be out on social media soon. And we will close up with a karakia. Kia mātou katoa, kua mutu mātou ia mātou mahi. Ia mātou kaupapa hoki, arahina mātou, kia kawe mātou ia mātou heipapa. Kia whakatupeua mātou ki ngā kaupapa me ngā mea e whakapono. Manakitia mai mātou. Thanks everyone for coming today. Thank you, David, and
Kia
have
ora.
a good evening. Bye everyone.